why you keep attracting toxic people. Have you ever wondered why the same kind of people keep showing up in your life? Different face, different name, different relationship, but somehow the same disappointment, the same manipulation, the same heartbreak. You promise yourself that this time will be different. Yet months later, you find yourself asking the exact same question. Why does this always happen to me? Here's something fascinating. Psychologists have found that attracting toxic people isn't usually about bad luck. More often, it's the result of unconscious patterns, emotional conditioning, and relationship dynamics that develop long before we're even aware of them. The uncomfortable truth is, toxic people don't randomly choose their targets. They often recognize certain behaviors, people-pleasing, weak boundaries, fear of rejection, or the constant need for approval, and they know exactly how to take advantage of them. But here's the good news. These patterns aren't permanent. Once you understand why your brain keeps repeating them, you can finally begin to break the cycle. So why do some people repeatedly attract toxic relationships while others seem to avoid them? What psychological patterns keep pulling you toward the wrong people? And more importantly, can you change those patterns before they hurt you again? By the end of this video, you'll understand the psychology behind toxic relationships, why your brain sometimes mistakes familiarity for safety, and several research-backed strategies that can help you build healthier, stronger relationships. Welcome back to the channel, or if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm a psychologist, and today we're exploring one of the most painful patterns I see in my practice. Why so many good people keep attracting toxic relationships. We'll uncover the hidden psychology behind emotional attachment, childhood conditioning, boundary setting, and the subtle warning signs that many people overlook until it's too late. If understanding the hidden mechanics of the human mind is something you care about, make sure you're subscribed. Because every week we explore the psychology behind behavior, emotions, relationships, and the invisible forces that shape our everyday lives. Now, let's begin with one important question. Why does your brain sometimes mistake what's familiar for what's healthy? A man sat in my office a few years ago and said something that has stayed with me ever since. He said, "Doctor, I have ended 5 relationships in the last 10 years. Every single one, with someone who lied to me, manipulated me, or eventually showed me a cruelty I never saw coming at the start. And every single time I swore the next person would be different." He looked at me and said, "What is wrong with me that I keep finding the same person wearing a different face? If you have ever looked back at a pattern in your own relationships, friendships, romantic partners, even certain friends, and noticed an eerie similarity in how they treated you, then what we are about to explore today might be one of the most important conversations you have with yourself all year." Today we are tackling a question that I hear constantly in my practice, and that question is, why do I keep attracting toxic people? By the end of this video, you're going to understand the real psychological mechanisms behind this pattern, why it has almost nothing to do with bad luck, a powerful story from my practice that illustrates this pattern in action, and practical research-backed strategies to finally break the cycle. If this kind of conversation matters to you, go ahead and subscribe, because every week on this channel, we explore the hidden psychology behind the patterns that quietly shape our relationships and our lives. I want to share something honest with you before we go further. Early in my career, I assumed that people who kept ending up in harmful relationships simply had poor judgment, or perhaps low self-esteem that made them settle. But after nearly 2 decades of clinical work, sitting with hundreds of people who described this exact same painful cycle, I came to understand something far more precise and, honestly, far more compassionate. This is not about poor judgment at all. It is about an internal blueprint operating completely below conscious awareness, one that was built long before these people ever made a single dating or friendship decision as an adult. Let us start with the concept that explains almost everything here, and that is the idea of relational templates. From the moment you are born, your brain begins constructing an internal model of what relationships are supposed to feel like, based entirely on your earliest caregiving experiences. This model is built before you have language, before you have conscious memory, often in the first few years of life. If your early relationships involved warmth, consistency, and emotional safety, Your nervous system learns that connection feels calm, dependable, and safe. But if your early relationships involved unpredictability, criticism, emotional withdrawal, or even outright harm, your nervous system learns something very different. It learns that this particular flavor of chaos, of walking on eggshells, of earning love through effort, of never quite knowing where you stand, is what connection feels like. And here is the critical part. Your nervous system does not label that pattern as bad. It labels it as familiar. And familiarity, to the primitive parts of your brain, often gets mistaken for safety, even when the pattern itself is genuinely harmful. This is why so many people find themselves consistently drawn to partners or friends who echo the emotional dynamics of their childhood, even when consciously they desperately want something different. The conscious mind says, I want kindness, stability, respect. But the nervous system, operating on a much older, much more automatic level, is quietly searching for what feels recognizable, and toxic dynamics, painful as they are, often feel recognizable in a way that healthy, calm relationships simply do not. There is a term for this in attachment research, the repetition compulsion, first described by Freud and later expanded by attachment theorists, referring to our unconscious tendency to recreate unresolved emotional dynamics from childhood, often in an unconscious attempt to finally get a different outcome this time. Here is something fascinating that neuroscience adds to this picture. Research on early relational trauma shows that inconsistent caregiving, where love and connection are unpredictable rather than steady, can actually create a stronger neurochemical attachment than consistent, secure caregiving does. This sounds counterintuitive, but it makes sense once you understand the brain's reward system. When connection is unpredictable, your brain releases dopamine not just when you receive affection, but in the anticipation and uncertainty surrounding it, similar to the neurochemical pattern seen in gambling and other variable reward systems. This is part of why toxic relationships can feel so intensely magnetic, almost addictive. The highs feel higher because they are unpredictable, and your nervous system has been trained, often since early childhood, to find that unpredictability compelling rather than alarming. If any of this is resonating with you so far, take a moment and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who might need to hear it today. And drop a comment letting me know if you have ever noticed a repeating pattern in the people you have attracted throughout your life. Because I promise you, you are far from alone in this. Let me tell you about a client I worked with. And as always, identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. His name was Marcus, 36 years old, a software engineer who came to me after his third serious relationship ended with a partner who had been emotionally manipulative and, at times, openly contemptuous toward him. Marcus was deeply self-aware in many areas of his life, successful in his career, thoughtful, kind to his friends, and yet he could not understand why. Every single time, he found himself pulled toward people who eventually treated him with disdain. As we worked together, we uncovered that Marcus had grown up with a mother who was warm and loving in unpredictable bursts, but who would withdraw into cold silence for days at a time whenever Marcus expressed a need, disagreed with her, or simply existed in a way that inconvenienced her. As a child, Marcus learned to become hypervigilant, constantly scanning for her moods, working hard to earn back her warmth whenever it disappeared. Without realizing it, Marcus had spent his entire adult dating life unconsciously recreating this exact dynamic, drawn to partners who offered intermittent warmth followed by emotional withdrawal, because some old protective part of him was still trying to finally crack the code, to finally earn consistent love from someone who initially seemed to withhold it. Once Marcus understood this pattern, something shifted profoundly. In our work together, he began noticing the early warning signs of this dynamic before it fully developed. The subtle push and pull, the inconsistency disguised as mystery or complexity. And for the first time in his adult life, he found himself genuinely uninterested in pursuing a connection that followed that familiar, painful rhythm. So how do you actually begin breaking this pattern in your own life? The first step is learning to recognize the early warning signs of a relational dynamic that mirrors old wounds, rather than waiting until you are already deeply attached. Toxic patterns rarely announce themselves clearly at the beginning. Instead, look for subtler signals, an inconsistency between someone's words and actions, a relationship that feels intensely exciting specifically because it is unstable, or a recurring sense that you must perform, achieve, or accommodate in order to receive basic warmth and respect. If a connection feels like it requires constant effort just to maintain a baseline level of decency, that is worth paying close attention to, especially early on. The second step is intentionally practicing what I call discomfort with calm. This sounds strange, but for many people whose nervous systems were shaped by inconsistency, genuinely stable, kind, predictable relationships can initially feel boring, even slightly uncomfortable, simply because they are unfamiliar. If you notice yourself losing interest in someone specifically because they are consistently kind and emotionally available, pause before assuming that boredom means incompatibility. Sometimes that flatness is not a lack of chemistry. It is simply your nervous system encountering safety for the first time, and not yet knowing how to recognize it as something good. The third step involves doing deliberate work to update your relational template directly, often most effectively through therapy, particularly approaches that work with both the cognitive and somatic, or body-based, aspects of early attachment wounds. Simply understanding this pattern intellectually is rarely enough to fully shift it, because the pattern lives in implicit, body-level memory, not conscious thought. Therapeutic approaches that help you process these early experiences, alongside practicing new relational experiences that feel initially unfamiliar but are genuinely safe, can gradually retrain your nervous system to recognize calm, consistent connection as something to lean into, rather than something to be suspicious of. I do want to offer an important caution here. If you recognize yourself in this pattern and are currently in a relationship involving real and ongoing harm, manipulation, control, or any form of abuse, please understand that awareness of this psychological pattern is not the same as having the tools or safety to exit that situation. If you are in a relationship that feels unsafe, please reach out to a licensed mental health professional or a domestic violence support service who can help you create a safety plan, because leaving these dynamics can sometimes carry real risk, and that process deserves careful, individualized support. There is one more layer to this that I think is worth mentioning, because it can be genuinely liberating to hear. Recognizing this pattern in yourself is not a sign that you are broken, naive, or destined to repeat it forever. The nervous system that learned to seek out chaos because it once equaled connection is the same nervous system capable of learning a new definition of love, one rooted in consistency rather than intensity. This rewiring takes time and it takes patience with yourself along the way, but the capacity for change here is genuinely well supported by what we understand about neuroplasticity and attachment repair. Let us bring this together with a clear summary. Repeatedly attracting toxic people is rarely a matter of poor judgment or bad luck. It is usually the result of an early relational template formed in childhood that has taught your nervous system to mistake familiar chaos for genuine connection. This shows up as an unconscious pull toward unpredictable, inconsistent dynamics that mirror old emotional wounds, sometimes even creating a kind of neurochemical pull similar to addiction. Breaking this cycle starts with learning to recognize early warning signs before deep attachment forms, practicing tolerance for the unfamiliar discomfort of healthy, calm relationships, and doing the deeper work of updating your relational template, often with professional support, so that safety eventually starts to feel as compelling as chaos once did. If this video helped you understand a pattern in your own relationships a little more clearly today, please subscribe to the channel, because next week we are exploring why some people stay in relationships long after they know it is time to leave. And based on everything we just covered, I think you are going to find that conversation deeply connected to today's topic. Take care of yourselves this week. Be gentle with the parts of you still learning what real safety feels like. And remember that recognizing this pattern is already the beginning of changing it. And if you are currently in a relationship that feels unsafe or abusive, please reach out to a licensed mental health professional or a local support service who can help you safely. I will see you in the next one.